day in Philadelphia. So today we find out whether the Wawa on Aramingo Avenue gets 2 stars or 3. We're all holding our breath. But while we wait for that information, we're going to do a show today about infighting in the MAGA world, within the GOP. And usually I'm going to throw a little cold water on this whole show at the top, which is an unusual thing to do. But I think usually these types of stories about political infighting tend to be overblown, and that when you look back, you realize that however the economy was doing during the next election was really more important than whether or not this person was fighting with that person. However, there is a case for an exception here because Donald Trump has been so exceptional in keeping everyone inside the GOP in line and in his pocket. And just recently, with the Epstein files and some other controversies, we have seen some legitimate open disagreement within the MAGA world. And we're asking today, do you think the MAGA infighting could become a real problem for the GOP? Give us a call, 888-477-9499. You can email studio2@whyy.org. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, drop a comment in the chat.
Yeah, and I'd love to get our listeners' takes. They always provide some interesting insights. Again, 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. We have our trio of news stories today.
Speaking of a Republican who breaks with the president sometimes.
Yeah,
yes.
Pennsylvania Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick. He's the leader of a group of lawmakers gearing up to propose a bill to extend the Obamacare tax subsidies. Remember that? That was the big sticking point and the 43-plus day government shutdown. And Fitzpatrick, he's co-chair of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus. They've already put together a proposal. It would extend the healthcare subsidies for 2 years and include some income caps. Fitzpatrick was on Fox News this morning saying the extension would be just step one. Take a listen.
Really, this is just a buying time, Brian, to get the longer healthcare solution, which our healthcare system is a mess. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. The premium tax credit structure is not the long-term fix. It's really putting a Band-Aid on a bleeding artery. What we need to do is get to the root causes of the high cost of health care in this country.
And so Fitzpatrick, he's urged Republican Senate Majority Leader John Thune to work across party lines with Democrat and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to secure a similar extension in the Senate. He says this is an urgent matter. Time is running out, and the willingness to cooperate should have no limits. He says there needs to be a bipartisan solution now. And if you recall, Brian Fitzpatrick was one of just 2 House Republicans and the only Pennsylvania Republican that voted against the big, beautiful bill over the summer. He's a moderate in a very purple area of Bucks County and Montgomery County. So, I mean, he's taking the lead here and trying to get folks from both sides of the aisle to patch this up.
Sure. And if you listen to the whole Fox News interview, there's still some disagreement that emerges because one of the things that he's pushing for is this idea that the subsidy would be routed to the individual, and people are concerned that if you route the subsidy that way, that people would leave the ACA pools altogether. And of course, insurance is all about pooled risk, and that would collapse the market. So look, the devil is always in the details with these things. However, like you said, politically, Fitzpatrick, this has always been his lane. He's been a purple-ish, at least by modern standards, a purple-ish type of legislator and been a political survivor. Yeah. Would he, if he had been on the ballot this November, if that had been a midterm election, not an off-year election, would he have survived? Some of the results out of Bucks County were not great for Republicans. So obviously he has to look out for his political interests. But genuinely, this has also been how he has legislated for a long time. He's been one of the few Republicans that doesn't loudly break with the president, but at least in vote will occasionally break with the president. Speaking of insurance, wow, 2 insurance stories to start the show. Thrilling stuff on Studio 2.
You can make it sound exciting, though. I know you can't.
Spicing it up, don't worry. So some advocacy groups in New Jersey, including the NAACP, are suing state insurance regulators, alleging that they use racial proxies when setting rates. The reporting here is from the New Jersey Monitor about the suit filed last week. The allegation here is that the state lets insurers factor in occupation and education when setting rates for customers, and that disproportionately harms black and brown drivers in a way that violates various New Jersey anti-discrimination statutes. Now, there was a 2008 study by the state that disputed this entire claim, but at least 5 states bar the use of educational and job attainment in car insurance rate setting. New Jersey has attempted to do this in the past, but a legislative push failed in 2021, setting up this lawsuit.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is companies have gotten very savvy at finding ways of sort of impacting certain groups. And, you know, clearly, I mean, folks have gone to the insurance companies, they've gone to the regulators, and now they feel like they have no choice but to file this lawsuit. But it seems like there was some supportive data that came from Consumer Reports Digital Lab. They found lower ranked, lower educated New Jersey workers typically paid more for car insurance than higher ranked, higher educated counterparts, although the trend didn't always hold true. But it's
still a correlation causation thing,
yeah,
too, because if that group of people also happens to live in denser areas
where
with more
there's
accidents.
more accidents.
Like I have higher car insurance living in South Philly. It's because people sideswipe me when I'm parked on the street because I'm living on a very narrow street. You know what I mean? Those types of things. So, right, it's hard to make it's the causal claims versus the correlative claims, and how do you do that in court? And I don't know, but it is complicated, right?
Yeah, it is very complicated, but it's going to be interesting. I mean, folks have filed these type of lawsuits to deal with home appraisals, which turned out to have some discriminatory issues there. Also with mortgage lending, there's been some issues there. So these lawsuits have been effective in sort of rooting out bias.
And New Jersey has stuff in the state constitution that could be impacted by all of this or could be violated by all of this. So again, state to state, that's going to differ, but New Jersey has some language that could be applicable here. We'll see what the courts say.
Absolutely. Third story. Actress Ali Larter, who is starring in one of my favorite shows, Landman, on Paramount Plus, by the way. She's from Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Didn't know that. But she was discovered at age 13 in the most Philly way possible. How you say? Well, apparently she was with her mom eating snapper soup at Bookbinders in Old City when a talent agent came up to her and asked if she wanted to be in a Phillies TV commercial.
That is so Philly.
There's
just layers of Philly to that.
Oh my goodness. And this story, of course, was featured in the Wall Street Journal. Cool write-up by them today. Her mom replied, "Oh gosh, maybe." The guy left his card.
Yeah.
They actually followed up. And of course, Ali did the commercial, and boom, she said her life changed after that. She started modeling, going to New York, Tokyo, Milan, and then she started acting. And we've seen her in all sorts of cool things like Legally Blonde, Heroes, Resident Evil. The list goes on. And of course, now Landman.
Which is,
One
very
of my
important to
favorite
you.
shows.
Yes. No, it was funny. So people don't know, Bookbinders in Old City, classic Philly restaurant, and the soup that she was apparently eating, snapper soup, is like their signature soup. It's a signature Philadelphia soup. So it's all it's almost like he's saying, I was about to take a bite of my cheesesteak outside D'Alessandro's when Bradley Cooper tapped me on the shoulder and asked if I wanted to play Ben Franklin in a Tasty Cake commercial. It's just Philly on top of Philly on top of Philly on top of
slurping soup.
She was just slurping soup.
And they
life changed. And she's in a Phillies TV. By the way, the Phillies TV commercial, I did try to track it down this morning.
Of course you did.
I could not find it. I did find an interview with her saying that she believes her mom has the tape. So Ali's mom, if you're listening,
bring it up.
Please send us the tape of the Phillies commercial. We would love to resurface this thing because this is a piece of Philadelphia lore.
And she was so cute. I mean, you see, she was a regular kid at the time when she got discovered. And I mean, just slurping some soup. At Bookbinder, just slurp.
Just slurp. A slurp could change your life, Cherry. By the way, Kate from New Jersey, one of our regulars,
oh my goodness,
called and said she went to school with Ali's dad. So they're a Philly family, South Jersey family through and through.
Oh, wow.
Very cool.
Yeah, very cool. And I just love the connection. Everybody cool is connected to Philly, and I just love that.
That's a fact.
The Philly area.
Some uncool people are connected to Philly, too, but we don't want to talk about that today.
We're not bringing them up.
We're not going to do it. We're going to talk about our big topic today, which is seemingly a real rift emerging within the MAGA world over the Epstein files, over this very controversial interview with a guy named Nick Fuentes. We're going to talk about all of that on the other side of the break today. And we would love to hear from you. Do you think MAGA infighting could become a real problem for the GOP? This question has probably been asked before, and the answer was no, but maybe this time's different. 888-477-9499. You can email studio2 at WHYY.org, YouTube, Facebook. Drop a comment in the chat and don't go anywhere. We'll be right back on Studio 2. And welcome back to Studio 2 on WHYY. I'm Avi Wolfman-Arndt.
And I'm Cherry Gregg. For years, Donald Trump's hold on the Republican Party has felt unbreakable. Party loyalists have backed him through scandals, impeachments, criminal convictions, and even an attempted insurrection. So it has been a bit jarring to see repeated headlines over the past week speculating about a rift within MAGA.
The biggest driver of this rift seems to be Trump's connection to disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein and his reluctance to release government files on the matter. Is this scandal different for Trump? And if so, why?
And we'll talk about it today on the show while also exploring another internal GOP controversy. This one revolves around white nationalism and specifically Nick Fuentes, a proudly racist and anti-Semitic streamer. After Fuentes sat down for an interview with Tucker Carlson, there's consternation over just how far right MAGA is willing to go.
Now, that's a lot of ground to cover,
yeah,
obviously.
It
so
is.
Luckily, we've got two great guests today. Eli Lake is a columnist for the Free Press and host of the podcast Breaking History. Eli, thanks for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks.
And Ali Breland is a staff writer for The Atlantic. Ali, nice to have you.
Thank you for having me.
And just to get it straight, that's Ali, Eli, Avi, and Cherry. So if your name doesn't end in an I, don't even bother participating in the show today. We'd love to hear from you, actually. Do you think MAGA infighting could become a real problem for the GOP? Give us a call, 888-477-9499. Email studio2 at WHYY.org. YouTube, Facebook, how you doing? Drop a comment in the chat.
And so, Ali and Eli, I want to start with this because, you know, we've seen those headlines. I've seen the terms civil war, split, breakup, fracture, all in connection with this battle over the release of the Epstein files. And so I want each of you to sort of comment and tell us what, if anything, about this may feel different to you from previous "this is the end of Trump" moments. And Ali, we'll start with you.
Yeah, to start off a little bit more on my specialty, I guess the sort of like white nationalist moment that the Republican Party is grappling with the ascent of this guy, Nick Fuentes, who's this young white nationalist who was interviewed by Tucker Carlson. And then Tucker Carlson, large swaths of the right, criticized both him and Nick for doing this like very friendly interview. contrary to some people on this specific issue, I don't think that this actually pretends like a civil war. I think that what is actually happening is that people are very frustrated by the changing of a guard where this young anti-Semitic racist wing of the party has sort of gathered within, I guess, like the younger positions and started to establish itself. And they're kind of just marching forward. I think that in some ways, like these people will be the future of the party, whether or not the old guard wants them to be. I think though that the rifts are much more potential and much more visible, and I guess threaten the GOP more from the perspective of Marjorie Taylor Greene, and what she stands for, because she, I think, is pressing down on more volatile fault lines with Epstein. I think that Epstein is a harder thing for the party to navigate. I think that that's just like a really difficult scandal that even if Trump's like core base doesn't depart from him on, I think that more moderate voters on the right are going to have a harder time stomaching that. But yeah. No.
Yeah. And so, Eli, your thoughts on why this feels like a different moment, specifically related to those Epstein files?
Well, I think we have to start with the fact that, despite the protestations of Steve Bannon, this is the last term for Donald Trump. I mean, I don't think there's any real chance that he's going to run for a third term. And if he did, that would be a constitutional crisis. So what you're seeing is the beginning of a kind of Republican Party and MAGA movement where Trump is no longer running for elections. So at a certain point, this is really a fight about, well, what kind of leader is J.D. Vance going to be, who's the heir apparent, and will there be a real primary? Will there be a fight in 2028 about who is going to be the nominee that year after the Trump era closes? So that's the backdrop. And then that battle line is, you've got in the Epstein scandal a perfect populist storm. You have, first of all, lurid details about a billionaire who engages in a kind of trafficking of minors for sexual exploitation. That right there, I think, is always going to kind of not only grab headlines, but sort of, capture the imagination. And unlike QAnon or Pizzagate, this is a story that involves sex with minors that happens to be true. So this time around, you can't really deny the fact that, Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were engaged, in a horrible kind of conspiracy conspiracy, to traffic in these underage girls, for more than, maybe 20 years. So that right there, I think, kind of gives it real legs. And then you have Trump himself. He, originally said he would release all of these files that were in the government's possession. And then there was this pathetic attempt from Attorney General Pam Bondi, who said, here are the Epstein files. And it was like a very kind of thin dossier of stuff that people already knew. And then Trump started saying, wait a second, this Epstein thing is a Democratic hoax. It's just a distraction. And, I think that his voters, his base, have a memory. They're not automatons. And they were like, wait a second, you told us only a couple months ago you're going to release the files, and this is a big deal. And so that's a hard political problem for him. And it's different than if he would have been facing something like this, say, when he was in the wilderness between 2021 and 2025, or, when he was the president between 2017 and 2021, because then, the future was still Trump's party.
Yeah. So that's
now it's like, maybe you can get away with it. And add to that, he's at a 39% approval rating.
I was just going to ask about that. Yeah.
That he's the inflation's still really bad. The Republicans just got walloped in the off-year election a few weeks ago. So all of these kind of factors add together. And then, like, on the merits, that's why, by the way, Trump flip-flopped. Yeah. And on Sunday night said, okay, go ahead and vote for it. And he put out the Truth Social and basically abandoned his position that he had been building for like 5 months. So.
Yeah, I mean, so there's like two things you're getting at here, Eli. Yeah. And I think the question is really like, which explanation do you find more compelling? That this is a problem for Trump, the Epstein stuff is a problem for Trump because of the specifics of the Epstein scandal, versus it's a problem for Trump because of the timing. Republicans just got wiped in an election. His approval ratings are, even by his standards, pretty darn bad. And Republicans simply feel emboldened to break with him on an issue, and this happens to be the issue of the day. Which of those two do you think is the more likely explanation for what's happening here, or the more compelling explanation for what's happening here?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think Epstein is one where it's such a ready-made issue for populism, which is a rebuke of the elites.
Right.
And even though I would argue that we've only had two populist presidents, Andrew Jackson and Donald Trump, populism remains a current in American politics from its very beginning. You can go Huey Long, George Wallace, Ross Perot. There's always a populist kind of faction in American politics. And this is a perfect scandal for that, for as a vessel for populist rage. So in that respect, this is the wrong issue to get on to oppose your base on. But I think the second thing is that, well, what are the consequences if he decides, what are the consequences for political leaders like MTG, Marjorie Taylor Greene, if she decides she's going to go against the president on this? They're not as stark as they would have been only a couple years ago. So I think it's a combination of both.
Interesting.
And by the way, we want to remind you, our listeners at home, on the road, and elsewhere, you can call in and participate in the conversation. Our question of the day is, do you think the MAGA infighting could become a real problem for the GOP? The number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. And if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, leave those comments in the chat. We have Frank from Trenton on the line. Frank, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
I think my comment really comes down to kind of agreeing with your guest that, I think this is going to be a shattering moment for our current look at the Republican Party being really the MAGA party, and the more traditional Republicans finally waking up and saying, okay, there's been enough of this clown show. And it's going to be interesting to see if there isn't a restructuring of the Republican Party as a whole.
Yeah. Thank you, Frank from Trenton. And this goes to my question. Frank sort of teed it up for me, Eli, because for folks who may not necessarily have been studying the Republican Party, paying attention to the right, when you think about this Epstein controversy, what are the factions? Who's in what camp? Because Frank talked about the traditional Republicans. There's MAGA. Who makes up this coalition?
You mean on Epstein, or you mean in
just generally, and in the fight, and then sort of the battle lines when it comes to Epstein?
Well, I would argue that the thing about American politics is that it always comes down to a binary choice for the most part. There, of course, have been third parties, but it comes down largely to a binary choice. So it's always compared to what? Trump took on the Republican establishment and won in 2016. And most of those kind of traditional Republicans, many of them became what are known as never Trumpers. A few of them, like Bill Kristol, kind of basically joined the Democratic Party. But a lot of them eventually came back to Trump because they found out that he was mainly a lot of Trump. I did this essay about a year ago, right before the election, but Trump is the greatest BSer in American history. And Americans kind of accept that there are people who are S-talkers, so to speak, which is to say he talks in hyperbole. He likes to say things that are very controversial, but then he, especially in his first term, governed in very traditional Republican ways. He cut taxes. He had a pretty strong bellicose foreign policy, especially when it came to Iran. He did it again. He joined Israel and bombed Iran, a few months ago. Any Republican kind of traditional Republican would have been very happy with that kind of thing. So there was a little bit of a disconnect. Trump would say things, and certainly his embrace of tariffs are against the old Republican consensus. So Trump would say things that would, make, Republicans uncomfortable. But in the end, he was fairly traditional as a Republican, and he was better than what was perceived to be a Democratic Party that was kind of captured by woke radicals. And, always ask yourself the question, compared to what? And I think that is kind of what kept the tent as large as it is. Without a figure like Trump, and with questions, because J.D. Vance, we still really need to find out, well, who is he? He started off 10 years ago as one of those never Trumpers. And now, he's a really, he's a different kind of figure at this point. He is somebody who is seen as maybe tolerating that Fuentes
Yeah.
wing.
Yeah.
So who is JD Vance? And that's a question that gets determined in a primary and in the political fighting now. And does Vance have the same skills as Trump? Will Republican voters say he's BSing and I can trust him to basically govern as a centrist conservative?
And so
I don't
you
know.
have under this
Yeah.
tent, it seems to me, you have, traditional Republicans who sort of came back. You have MAGA Republicans. Then you have far right extremists sort of under. And
that's
then you
right.
have some people who kind of glommed on because they didn't like what the Democrats were serving up. Am I seeing this coalition correct?
That's right. RFKJ. You had a lot of normies, I think, who were turned off by a Democratic Party that tried to pretend that Joe Biden was compos mentis, that he was capable of governing, and they were running him till his second term until he completely discredited himself in the debate. There wasn't a real primary process. These were things that I think turned people off and made and softened some of the elements of Trump's character that turned off a lot of the normie voters,
Yeah.
in 2020.
Yeah.
So you kind of had a perfect storm for him. He was able to take advantage of a Democratic Party that, had a very loud, very left-wing faction. They had the Joe Biden scandal, as I call it. And, you had a lot of people who were like, wait a second, this Trump guy seems kind of normal. And if he can keep it together, and Trump is brilliant for images, brilliant for memes. So in that respect, he was able to kind of win. But like, where is he now? 39%.
Yep.
It's a different story now that he's in the White House.
Yeah, and midterm less than a year away now.
Yeah.
We asked the question of you, do you think the MAGA infighting could become a real problem for the GOP? Tony says, become? Already there. I smell duck. Lame duck. That's Tony's comment. So, Ali, I want to bring you back in the conversation because sort of, I think there seems to be broad acceptance here, at least among our commenters and the panel today, that this is a different political moment for Trump, different from the times that he railroaded Jeff Flake or Mike Pence, or the times that he said, I could shoot anyone on Fifth Avenue and get away from it. He's not quite there anymore. And that leads to this question about what is MAGA after Trump. And that leads, I think, to JD Vance, who is connected to Tucker Carlson, who recently sat down and did this interview with Nick Fuentes that set the sort of, at least the internet world of the right on fire. So first, we do need some background. Tell our listeners who Fuentes is and why this particular sit down was so controversial.
Yeah. Nick Fuentes is this young white nationalist. He's like 27 now. He's been doing this since he was in college. And by white nationalism, I don't mean this like hyperbolically. Like, he says the N-word. He's extremely misogynistic. He is very anti-Semitic. He complains about quote unquote organized Jewry. He's complained about quote unquote organized Jewry being a quote unquote transnational gang. He's blamed a lot of the United States' problems on supposed conspiracy theories orchestrated by Jewish people. He said that we need to resegregate portions of the United States. And so he's been kind of on the fringes and been ignored by conservative establishment movements for like a long time, up until recently, where in this past year, different figures like Candace Owens and Dinesh D'Souza, who are both prominent conservatives on the right, had him on for debates. That was a sort of interesting breaking moment in that they felt like they could no longer ignore him, but they had to engage with him, albeit critically. Tucker Carlson, who debated him, or excuse me, had him on his podcast at the end of the month in October, illustrated this sort of even further, I guess, like breaking point in that he didn't invite Fuentes on to debate him. He had Fuentes on to sort of talk to him and sort of have this very soft interview. And it was almost like this coming out party for Nick Fuentes into the conservative movement, as not just this like side figure that is really influential to a lot of young men who are conservatives, and even young staffers in DC. There have been different reports about people sort of discovering that Fuentes carries a lot of weight amongst the average young conservative staffer in DC. But it was this moment in which he became famous through Tucker, and then also the Heritage Foundation defended Tucker's decision to have Nick Fuentes on his podcast. Initially, they said that we don't agree with Nick Fuentes, the president, Kevin Roberts. He said, I find his views abhorrent, but we shouldn't cancel Tucker for this. he since backtracked, but still kind of didn't throw Tucker under the bus for this or really criticize him that deeply. He just sort of went in on Nick, which is kind of the issue to begin with. But yeah, Nick illustrates this younger portion of the right. It's not just Nick Fuentes. It's all of these young men that he's influencing that are pervasive through the younger portions of conservative movement in America, that represent this sort of nastier side of the right that I think a lot of voters are going to be put off by. And for someone like Vance to be potentially connected to that is not ideal for his like future prospects. And I think that someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene is not directly like animated by this kind of specific thing, but she is responding to this sort of general unpalatability that MAGA is like kind of experiencing and is trying to get ahead of that. I don't think it's a coincidence that like all of the ways she breaks with Trump happen to be on the very popular sides of the issue. So like she breaks with him on Gaza, she breaks with him on the Democratic positions on healthcare, and healthcare policy. She's broken with him on deportations. These are all things that Trump has like pushed very hard. The public sentiment doesn't line up with him on. And while she's not necessarily like going to potentially face a presidential run against Trump, if she's facing someone like Vance, this is a way to get ahead of it, especially because Vance doesn't have the same sort of charisma and magneticness and sort of like Teflon Don status, to reuse the old term, that Trump does. So like these things being affixed to Vance, I think are going to be much more deleterious for his potential campaign than they would with Trump. And that is kind of a situation how like Marjorie Taylor Greene is more powerful than she used to be. And she's kind of going up against Trump, but she's not necessarily winning, but she could like
Yeah.
crush Vance potentially. And I think she is trying to build herself into a figure that can do that.
But ideologically, like what is the sort of the crossroads here for
Yeah.
the GOP? What crossroads does Fuentes represent? You're saying that he could be a lead weight on someone's, electoral prospects, but at the same time, clearly some within the GOP feel like we need to bring him in because he brings in certain voters or he animates a certain part of our base. And so I guess I want you to, set the stakes for our listeners. Like Carlson isn't having Fuentes on out of generosity. He's doing it because presumably he feels he needs to on some levels. So there's sort of a question there of why and what the stakes are for the sort of, more visible members of the GOP and the advocacy wing.
Yeah, I mean, I apologize for using a trite metaphor, but like it explains it well. I think we're kind of in the fog of war stage where like we don't understand what is completely happening with this like sort of battle as these people are fighting each other. And I don't think that everyone understands either. And I think that while there are clear factions going in, I think that like we don't exactly understand how these things are going to break.
But
And
you
I
did
think that people are
describe
still
them.
trying
You
to
did
decide
say
that.
that you feel like Fuentes or sort of Fuentes aligned people are the future of the Republican Party. I know there was that statistic from that guy, Roger, I think his name is, that said 30 to 40% of young staffers. Now, this is just some guy's anecdote. Young staffers on the Hill are Fuentes followers. So if this is the future of the Republican Party, like a savvy politician or a savvy figurehead is going to embrace it. And I guess the question is it really the future?
I
let me-
would
Go ahead.
push back on that.
Go on,
Eli.
Eli.
Yeah.
I would just put back on that because I do think that, in basketball, there's something called the Ewing theory. At the end of Patrick Ewing's career, the Knicks were better when they got rid of Patrick Ewing. And there's a little bit of a Ewing theory going on with Nick Fuentes, which is that if you are perceived to be a party that tolerates this absolute hateful garbage, you're going to alienate lots of people that have become Republicans.
Sure.
One of the ironies, I should say, only in America, that the leading white nationalist would have a Latin surname, which is kind of amazing, given the fact that, part of I've had to wade into the muck of Fuentes. So he's honest about this. He acknowledges, hey, my father is half Mexican. And which one would think would be self-discrediting from a white nationalist logic.
But that
there
goes to
you
this
are.
broader point of like, what is this? Like, and I've seen people who are, avowed followers of him who are African American. Like, there's a
don't
sense of like
understand
what
it.
actually animates this. And I've heard some people speculate that it's simply the meanness, that young men are just, drawn to the rhetoric more than the message. And I guess as we get ready for break, real quick, Ali, like, is that right? Is it the message? Is it the rhetoric? Is it the style? Like, what makes it effective? And I think in answering that question, we might know what kind of future it has in the Republican Party.
Yeah, I think it's definitely effective. I think that the way that you think about like the minorities that are a part of the movement is that those people are very visible because they're so exceptional. But I mean, like there was a lot of Latino people voting for Trump because they didn't quite believe he was going to say what he was going to do in terms of
Yeah.
deportations and like so. And so I think that's like one way to process it. The other bit of it too is that is part of why Nick is so appealing, and that is why he is a future for the party and like why he will exist and why he will endure. But at the same time, there have been historical moments where there have been significant sort of white national swings within conservatism that more mainstream portions have had to try to manage. So like the John Birch Society back in the mid-century was like a very important movement that William F. Buckley, is a very prominent conservative thinker, did this sort of weird game with, where he would try to marshal them and speak to their leaders in private and try to like sort of guide the movement towards his own ideological goals. But then in public, he was like eschewing them. He was saying, we don't support this. This is not okay. And so I think that like that provides a potentially good roadmap into how
That
people
could be
like
the
Nick can
blueprint.
both be the future, but then also are this thing that's like kind of stiff-armed, but like mostly aesthetically.
Interesting. Okay, so we have a bunch of commenters and some callers. We'll get you guys on the other side of this break. Repeating our question this hour, do you think the MAGA infighting could become a real problem for the GOP? Number is 888-477-9499. You can email studio2 at WHYY.org. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, you can drop a comment in the chat. We're talking with Eli Lake, columnist for the Free Press and host of Breaking History, and Ali Breland, staff writer for The Atlantic. Don't go anywhere. You are listening to Studio 2 on WHYY.
And welcome back to Studio 2 on WHYY. I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman-Arndt. We're talking about ruptures in the MAGA coalition this hour, the anger over the Epstein files, about a Tucker Carlson interview with white nationalist Nick Fuentes, the Marjorie Taylor Greene Trump breakup, and we're asking, big picture, if this is a sign that MAGA could really be fracturing.
Yes, our question to you, our listeners and viewers, is this. Do you think the MAGA infighting could become a real problem for the GOP? The number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2 at WHYY.org. And if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, drop your comments in the chat. We have a couple callers on the line. We're going to bring them in just a moment. But I wanted to wrap something up with you, Ali. I mean, one of the paradoxes of Trump's political story is that his coalition in a lot of ways has been more diverse than past Republican coalitions. And so it's almost, it's just so interesting now that that you see the right sort of embracing the Nick Fuentes wing of the party. And Nick Fuentes actually says he's no longer the radical on the outside. He's actually the leader on the inside now. This is what he said after going on Tucker Carlson. By the way, that interview got 4 million views plus, when he usually only gets a few 100,000. Just your thoughts on how it could splinter this coalition that Trump built, given the diversity that he was able to bring into the GOP for the very first time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a couple of things to note. I would say that the diversity that Trump brought in was historically high, but I mean, still like relatively low to what the left and Democrats have been doing. Polls, which can be suspects, indicate that he's starting to lose and shed some of those voters that he was able to gain from diverse and like different types of backgrounds. And I think that some of that too, or a large portion of that, is less Trump. Trump certainly bears some responsibility, but a lot of it's I think the failure of Democrats to anticipate this going on and to see the signs from the 2020 election that they were starting to lose these kinds of voters and figure out better ways to message to these different kinds of groups. And so I think that those are like the kinds of main things that's the main way that like these issues should be thought about moving forward.
Comment here from Ellen, who says, I am appalled that our country is even having this conversation about an anti-Semitic, horrible person like Nick Fuentes. Trump unleashed hate in his reaction to Charlottesville, that there are good people on both sides. A Pandora's box has been let out. None of this is normal or should be tolerated. Let's bring in a caller now to talk with our guests today, who are Eli Lake, columnist for the Free Press, and Ali Breland, staff writer for The Atlantic. And now caller Bill from West Mount Airy on line 2. Hey, Bill, you're on Studio 2.
Yeah.
What's your comment?
Yeah, hi. Hi. I just wanted to say, I think the idea that we're going to go back to some Republican Party like with Ford and Rockefeller is terribly naive. That ship is sunk, and the people who are for Trump, or if Trump disappeared tomorrow, they would still be around. I'm not saying that Fuentes would be elected president, but I'm saying we have to face the reality. And, where I live in Mount Airy, we're full of progressives, and we're trying to invent the Democratic Party so we have somebody to face against us. But people don't value the Constitution. They don't know the Constitution. They just want spectacle. When I say people, I mean Trump supporters.
Well, that's Bill from West Mount Airy. How about another caller here?
Yeah.
Here's Chung from Huntington Valley. You're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
Hi. There's another issue that's splitting GOP, in my opinion, and that is the issue on United States unconditional support to Israel for bombing Gaza and committing genocide. And I think this issue unites Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, Candace, and Nick Fuentes. So I think this is another big force that might split the GOP.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Question. I'll put that to
thoughts.
Eli Lake. I mean, so this is there's sort of a horseshoe theory thing going on with sort of the far left criticism of Israel and the far right criticism of Israel kind of converging and being amplified because of the conflict in Gaza. And do you think that is potentially a real issue for the GOP moving forward?
Well, I mean, I would challenge the premise of that caller's question. I don't think there is a genocide by any normal definition. And B, I would hardly say that U.S. support for Israel is unconditional. Both President Biden and President Trump have, I think, had to at times coerce Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So that's my substantive remark. It's certainly true that there is more in common with the foreign policy positions now of Tucker Carlson, although not the Tucker of only 10 years ago, with elements of the far left of the Democratic Party. And that's beyond simply Israel, although Israel has become the kind of main way that it's expressed. But, Tucker Carlson is in many ways believes that America should not be as engaged in the world. And I think that's probably the position of somebody like Zohran Mamdani, that, our interventions in the world, our support for foreign governments usually are pretty bad. That is a kind of perennial debate that has happened in the United States. And it's rare that during most of the Cold War, there was largely a kind of consensus between the parties on that against communism. For the most part, though, there usually is a huge debate over what should America be an active global power. And that is certainly a big discussion, both, I think, within the Democratic and Republican parties. And that may be a reason for kind of realignment. It depends on how important foreign policy is going to be perceived to be in the election.
Sure. I guess just to follow up with you, Eli, I mean,
Yeah.
I think there's we're trying to negotiate this whole conversation, like what parts of sort of Trump and MAGA will endure. And I think one of the big questions is on foreign policy, will that tilt toward isolationism end up being a key core feature of the coalition, or is it something that's sort of disposable in the long run?
Wait a second. Has there been a MAGA tilt towards
Rhetorically,
isolationism?
Rhetorically speaking, I'm not talking about.
I would argue not rhetorically. I mean, listen, I would say the great success of Trump's term so far has been successfully bombing with no real consequence Iran's nuclear program, setting it back significantly, and getting the hostages returned and a ceasefire in the Gaza war. That's not Tucker Carlson's foreign policy. Tucker Carlson actively tried to do everything he could to dissuade Trump from bombing Iran,
and had a debate with Ted Cruz about it. But I think I say rhetorically,
that's right.
though.
I'm saying, but I'm saying, what's MAGA? Is Trump MAGA or is Tucker MAGA?
That's my question. That's exactly my question.
I would argue that Trump is MAGA.
Still,
and
even as he becomes a lame duck, it's still more Trump than it is Tucker Carlson expressing some ideas or iterating off some ideas that Donald Trump did help bring to the fore.
Well, okay, fair. I think that there's something. I think this is a little bit of. I mean, this is not a criticism of you, Avi.
Yeah.
Because I hear it a lot. But if you go back to his 2015 elevator speech, he is not expressing an American isolationism. He says America needs to do something about Iran's nuclear program. Sure. This is a terrible deal. He made that a centerpiece of his 2016 campaign. He made it a centerpiece of his 2024 campaign.
But you would agree that something that the isolationist wing within the party, whether taking cues from Trump, like maybe they were misreading his cues, but they did feel somewhat emboldened by MAGA in a way that they did not feel emboldened. I think many would argue under sort of in the Bush era, that there was something about Trump and his message that made them say, look, we think there's a path forward for an isolationist foreign policy. And J.D. Vance expresses some of this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, to a point, which is to say Trump was willing to say the Iraq war was a disaster when a lot of Republicans wouldn't. He's running against the brother of George W. Bush in 2016. Trump was willing to kind of, Trump was willing to kind of take much more extreme positions, unlike George W. Bush. He was saying, he was deliberately baiting like Muslim Americans. He was kind of entering that kind of rhetoric, and that plays to a kind of tradition in American politics. We saw that from like Pat Buchanan and so forth, and certainly his view of closing the border, his idea that illegal immigration is a kind of invasion, that goes right back to Pat Buchanan. So there's an element of that, but Trump is also somebody who has proclaimed, a very strong and acted in this very strong U.S.-Israel alliance. That's also been part of his legacy. So I don't know that he fits into that box. And that's why I'm not entirely sure that those who claim that America should cut off its relationship with Israel and be hostile to Israel are following in a MAGA blueprint, because the leader of MAGA, in my opinion, is the most pro-Israel president since Harry Truman.
Yeah.
So in that respect, I do think that there is a disconnect, which is why the fight over 2028 and who is the next leader and where J.D. Vance comes down on this, and J.D. Vance, by the way, has been on both sides of these questions, is a live one. I don't necessarily think that it's determined that Tucker is the next leader, or that view is what MAGA is.
Yeah, I want to read a couple comments. Dee says, I'm afraid of what the various factions will do as they continue this infighting. As they grow desperate, they will tell more lies and engage in more strong arming and create more fear so that they have a scapegoat. It's a venerable tradition to target Jews in particular, but all marginalized groups will suffer under their tactics. And Frank says, I think this is a shame that the Epstein controversy is dominating the government agenda currently. However, I think this could be very important for equal rights. Women are the majority population and have been discriminated against forever. This is not a right versus left debate. Now we have women on both sides standing up for justice for victims, exposing the abuse and exploitation that men, especially those with privilege and power, have been bathing in for years. And so I want to bring up Marjorie Taylor Greene again, because, she's sort of taking this stand. She says she's standing up for the women. She believes that the Epstein case, also her stance, with regard to Gaza has been some, part of the breaking point with President Trump. And so I want to talk about what would happen if she's able to survive this. What message will that send to other Republicans who may have been on the fence, who may not have spoken out when they wanted to? What sort of signal will this send? And what are you looking for in the next coming weeks when you think about her being on the outside? And, I want you to jump back in the conversation, Ali.
Yeah, I truthfully don't know because I think that the polling on this has been like kind of clear for a while. Like the United States' approach to Gaza has been like quite unpopular, but it's still been a sort of like thing that people on both sides of the aisle don't want to engage with, or mostly, with some exceptions, dissent from, I think, the US's historical position on this. I think that like maybe, I don't know, if Marjorie Taylor Greene is a model of like how you can do this successfully. People like to see things in real life, and so maybe that shifts things. I don't really have a good sense of that, but that's like my rough sort of estimation.
Eli, do you have a thought on this? Sort of what will you be looking for if she escapes this, if she's unscathed and she's sort of able to survive this politically? What will that signal to other Republicans who may not have spoken out against Trump in the past?
Well, if she survives, obviously the lesson is that you can take on Trump now in 2025, going to 2026 in a way that you couldn't before. So Trump threatened to primary her in that Space Laser Truth Social post from Friday evening. But let's look at the context, right? So Trump goes full bore on Marjorie Taylor Greene, but then substantively flips on the issue. Yep. So he was in the process of whipping Republicans to get them not to vote for the discharge petition. There will be a vote today in the House. And then he says on Sunday night, go ahead and do it. America first, release the files. Okay, so that's the first thing. So she already kind of won on the substance. The second thing is his remarks Sunday night where he said, Tucker can interview who he wants. That's what he does. I don't know who Nick Fuentes is, it wasn't an endorsement of Nick Fuentes. We should make that very clear. But it was basically an endorsement of Tucker. He's still in the family. I'm not going to denounce Tucker for this stuff. I don't know who this guy is. I'm not controversial. I guess Nick Fuentes is controversial. That's how he says it in a very kind of Trumpian way. That was also in some ways a substantive nod to Marjorie Taylor Greene. So in some ways you could argue she's already kind of won.
Yep.
He's changed his position on the Epstein files, and he decided to basically not weigh in and denounce Tucker Carlson, which he did denounce a few months earlier when he called him Kooky Tucker after he was criticized for bombing Iran. So there you go.
Yeah, and I guess the ultimate test is the ballot box 2026. If indeed a primary challenge comes to MTG, Lauren Boebert, someone else who falls out of Trump's good graces, and what the result of that election is. But of course, we do not know the answer to that question today, November 18th, 2025. But I thank you both for having this great conversation with us. You heard today from Eli Lake, a columnist for the Free Press, host of Breaking History. Eli, thank you so much for your time today on Studio 2. And Ali Breland, staff writer for The Atlantic. Thank you so much, Ali, for taking a little time on Studio 2 today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Craig from Mount Airy says, it's impossible to predict if MAGA will splinter, but if MTG can surrender to truth, there is hope that other Republicans may follow her lead. The truth will always win eventually. That's a comment from Craig from Mount Airy. Thank you so much to our producers, Debbie Builder, Andreas Copes, and Hazel May Bryan. Mike Schiffler, thanks. He's our visual producer. Al Banks and Tina Calicay engineered today's show. Our executive producer is Kevin McCory from Studio 2 here at WHYY in Philadelphia. I'm Cherry Gregg.
Everyone's doing three initials today. I guess I should say I'm AWA. That's what it literally says in the script.
There you go.
There you go. I'm AWA. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
And I'm CTG. I should have gave the three. I should have gave the three. CTG over here. Tomorrow at noon, as the 250th anniversary of America's founding approaches, we've been on a tavern tour, if you didn't know, of our region to explore what life was like for the colonialists.
It's the first in an occasional series we're producing in the lead up to Independence Day 2026. Tomorrow's episode takes us to Man Full of Trouble, a refurbished tavern at Society Hill, which first opened its doors to thirsty dock workers all the way back in 1759.
Yeah, you can join us for that conversation tomorrow, but coming up next is Here and Now.